So Netanyahu, at least from what we saw out here, was this seemed to be instigating things or playing a part in the instigation of things in the Middle East. Will this new government change the relationships at all with, say, what happens in the West Bank or in the settlements or just the rest of the Arab world?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's a little complex. First of all, because there's so many, when you talk about the relationships, there's so many different ones. There's the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Dubai and Bahrain and Morocco and all those countries that, they put together during the Trump administration, and the Biden administration is continuing that. And in terms of that, there's no question. That was a really popular move in Israel across the spectrum, and that's continuing and continuing. And
those are the treaties we talked about in a previous episode, but those are the treaties that were all signed. I think a lot of people in the United States might have even missed this, but last summer, the Trump administration got a lot of treaties signed, right?
Trump's a peacemaker.
And I'll tell you what, some people were kind of poo-pooing it, saying, oh, but unless you get the Palestinians, it doesn't count. But I think it's a pretty big deal because we've changed that idea that there's a war between Jews and the Arab world is gone. The Arab world and Israel are making peace like one country after another. So there is a conflict between Israel and Palestinians, but it's not a conflict between Israel and the Arab world. And actually, the Biden administration said that they're looking to sign even more of those treaties in the coming years. So it's one of the few things that they actually are continuing from the Trump administration. Like I said, whoever you agree with, a stop clock is right twice a day, right? Just because you disagree with someone on a lot of things doesn't mean they might not be right on something. So there's those treaties. Then there's what'll happen with the Palestinians. This is a tough one because, it takes two to tango, right? It's sort of like saying, to me, well, so are you going to go out and like date Claudia Schiffer? And it's like, well, I'll ask, but she's going to have something to say about it too, right?
I don't know. What does she look like these days? Claudia?
Oh, that's a good point.
Get a better reference.
That's her on the way down, Dan.
Yeah, exactly. You might be able to get her. It might be too.
Hey, as far as I'm concerned, she will always look the way she did in Wayne's World.
You look good in that ripped T-shirt, man. Come on, I'll sell you some short.
I know that was the only name I could think of. I should have said Bella Hadid or something, right?
Oh yeah, well that would.
Yeah, it would be topical anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, the Palestinians have been really clear that to them, occupied Palestine means all of Israel, and that compromising on that is it's like a harm to Palestinian dignity. And dignity is an important value, and I can understand that. But if you don't make room for compromise, it's hard to see how this is going to play out. So, even when you had very left leaders, and I'm talking, going back to the early 2000s, you had people like Shimon Peres and Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, these leaders from back then, they weren't able to close the deal either. So there are some people who say that Netanyahu actively didn't want to close a deal, and he did say things like that, but he also said things that were sort of the opposite of that too. So it's hard to tell what was electioneering, just statements and what was real, because if you take all of his statements, they contradict each other.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure is that it's not only up to Israel, and whatever it's going to take, it'll be more than just a new Israeli government. I think it'll also take a new Palestinian government. And there was supposed to be Palestinian elections, and they canceled them. So, but I think it's going to take new governments on both sides before we see a change in that area.
Well, do you think that this is a government, at least for the Israeli side, that would have a better chance of getting something done than Netanyahu?
I'd say if this government had, if there were new governments on both sides, there could be a chance that this is where it gets a little tricky. I think Lapid is more open to it. Bennett is less open to it. The really left parties like Labor and Meretz are very open to it. The Arab parties might be open to it, but they might want it on terms that the other parties might not accept. To get something this comprehensive done, you need a lot of agreement. And you're talking about a coalition where there's a lot of different ideas and interests. And so, like I was saying, they can get together and agree to disagree and say, okay, I'll just focus on this one issue that's important to me if you don't object, and you focus on your issue and I won't object to that. But you get to something like this, everyone's going to want to have a say. And I think if there really were, like, for example, if there's a new Palestinian government tomorrow and the possibility of a peace treaty became a true and immediate possibility on both sides, I think there's a pretty good chance that this current government might actually fall apart and we'd end up having to have new elections. And the new elections would essentially be a referendum on how to pursue a peace process.